The third reason, it's about a fundamental shift of values. I mean, Andrew's touched on the whole business of revaluing. We need to recognise the value of unpaid work. And depending on how you measure it, it's worth the equivalent, somewhere between the equivalent of 1/3 and more than 2/3 of GDP. Depends how you measure it. We don't think that something like going to 35 hours, although it might be a good start, is really enough. Because it doesn't disturb the current pattern in which paid work dominates the shape of our lives, our identities, our opportunities, and our relationships. It structures inequalities between women and men, and it entrenches them. So we don't think that just achieving a slightly better work-life balance is really what this is about. This is about a very much more radical move to redistribute paid and unpaid time. Long hours of paid work are not compatible with carrying out all those essential functions of the human economy. Redistributing paid and unpaid time would help to right the balance between women and men and between the market economy and the core economy. So instead of the so-called rules of the market economy shaping our lives, and I must say I'm increasingly amazed at the way we simply accept that the market determines the state of the national economy and whether we should or shouldn't cut our deficit and at what speed and in what way, as though the market was some being, with the sentient being. And actually, of course, you have to keep thinking about a lot of, I always think of sort of sweaty men in pink shirts and braces gambling, which is really what this is all about. So instead of the rules of the market economy shaping our lives, we'd have the values and the rhythms of the human economy, if you like, of human society. It's much better for our health and well-being. We lead more balanced lives. We're more in control of our time. We have less stress trying to juggle a long hours job with essential responsibilities at home and all these things. So plenty of reasons there. And finally, the last reason is that it's essential for the future of the planet. It gets us off the consumer treadmill. I mean, at the moment, although of course there are people who do work very long hours in order to make ends meet, many of us just work long hours in order to earn, and earn more money, and we need to earn more money so that we can consume more, and we consume at the expense of the natural environment. And so we need to reverse this trend and change our ideas about how much is enough. And by shifting the amount of time we spend in paid work, that will help that development. So there are many more reasons why we should move to a shorter working week, and they are set out in this report. And I brought 10 copies here, and I don't want to take any of them home with me, so if anybody would like to pick one up and go with it, please do. The average amount, if you look at the working age population, on average, we do 19.6 hours of paid work a week. Remember, we're asking for 21. And 20.4 hours of unpaid work. Now, these averages mask huge inequalities, as I've said. And our proposition is that if you move towards a shorter working week, you can help bring in fact, the standard nearer to the average. You can help to iron out those inequalities. We can draw on the experience of the 3-day week in the 1970s, where people were very surprised after the event to find that productivity didn't dip when people went onto a 3-day week in proportion to the reduction in working time. We can look at this French experiment. Now, many people say, oh, the French experiment was a disaster. Well, actually, it wasn't. By the time it was abolished by Sarkozy, many of the companies who had refused to reinstate a longer working week. In other words, it satisfied people and it stayed the way it was. And it was very popular with people, particularly with working mothers, and it was mainly unpopular because there was an annual amount that people could work, and people felt they'd lost control over when they worked. So most of the objections of working people was about losing control over your time rather than actually going down to a 35-hour week. There are other examples, but perhaps I won't go on too long. I just, the overall lessons from those other examples are that workers tend to be more productive hour for hour if they do shorter hours, that people who feel that they have more control over their time have better well-being, are happier, and that when shorter working hours are affordable, workers are much more satisfied. So this brings us to the big objection, which you won't have escaped any of you, I'm sure. If I work shorter hours, how can I feed the family and pay the mortgage? And this is where we need to get practical. And we've set out in this report some suggestions based to a certain extent on Peter Victor's work in Canada, but some of our own ideas as well. And these have yet to be better developed. So we are making the proposition, we say we can understand what the problems are, and we now need to get serious about how we can move forward with this. So some ideas for dealing with this problem about the fact that many people would feel that they had too little money if they had to work shorter hours. Firstly, you have incremental change, so that gradually, over a number of years, you could trade reductions in time for money so that you don't feel the reduction in income so much. So that's one important thing, and getting people used to the idea. Secondly, you need different incentives for employers, change the kind of incentive structure so that employers are encouraged to take on more people. You certainly need more training to help fill skills gaps that would open up. You need a less steep pay gradient so that people are not comparing themselves with people who've got much, much more income. In other words, to try and level out the wage gradient. A higher minimum wage and more progressive taxation, changing people's expectations and values, and changing patterns of consumption and ideas about how much is enough. I don't know how many of you notice when you go out, mainly outside London, the huge growth in the number of self-storage units. Yellow boxer. It really is quite remarkable. I've now started pointing it out wherever I go. This is one of the fastest growing sectors of British business, and this is individual household storage, small scale. People have got too many things to put in their houses, so they're having to rent space to put their things in. So we've got to change our values about that. So, we go into much more detail about these ways in which you can deal with the problem of lower income in the report, which I would encourage you all to read. There are plenty of examples, Andrew's mentioned some of them, from the past where something that appeared to be normal and absolutely unassailable can change quite quickly over a short period of time. I mean, Andrew mentioned some examples. I'd add votes for women. I'd add not smoking in bars and restaurants, wearing seatbelts and crash helmets and things like that, where suddenly, and I mean suddenly in perhaps 10, 15 years, something that everybody thought was ought to be one way turned out to be completely the other way, and people couldn't countenance turning the clock back. Now, what are the things that make that shift happen? Firstly, you need evidence that it will make a difference. Secondly, you need changing circumstances and possibly also a sense of crisis. And you need a campaign. So we're getting a growing body of evidence about the value of shorter working hours. We have profoundly changing circumstances and a growing sense of crisis. So the conditions are beginning to develop where this is possible. And we have the beginnings of a campaign. So that's
Thank you.
me.
Thank you very, very much.